You know that moment, right? You're in a coffee shop, two lines for the register. You pick one, maybe because, I don't know, the person at the front looks like they know what they want.
Oh, yeah. Happens all the time.
Then, inevitably, the other line starts zipping along while you're stuck watching someone debate the merits of oat versus almond milk. That little flash of, what if I'd picked the other line? Have you ever felt that?
Definitely. Everyone has, I think.
That's the kind of moment we're diving into today.
Exactly. That feeling of a path not taken, that moment where things could have gone one of two ways, it brings us to a really useful idea. Bifurcation.
Bifurcation, okay.
Yeah, it's essentially about something splitting into two distinct possibilities. Think of it like a fork in the road. And today, we're going to explore this idea, how it helps us understand the choices we make.
Right. So for this deep dive, we've gathered some interesting sources for you listeners. We've got everything from straightforward dictionary definitions.
The basics, yeah.
To how it pops up in more technical and scientific fields. And even some insights from research into how we actually make decisions.
Behavioral economics comes into play there.
Our goal is basically to give you a clear understanding of what bifurcation means and, how it shows up in your world without you having to wade through all those different sources yourself. A bit of a shortcut.
Because when you start to see these moments as bifurcations, these key points where a single possibility branches into two or works, it can really shed light on the nature of decision-making itself and, the paths we end up on.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute basics then. What does bifurcate actually mean?
Well, if you look at dictionary definitions, say from dictionary.com or the Cambridge Dictionary, you'll find a pretty consistent and somewhat formal meaning to divide into two parts.
Divide into two parts. Formal is right.
It is. It carries a sense of a clear, almost, formal separation.
Right. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue in everyday conversation, does it? I can't imagine saying to a friend, my weekend plans have bifurcated.
Huh? No, probably not.
No.
You've actually hit on something important there. Dictionary.com points out that in our regular informal language, we're much more likely to just say things like forks.
Yeah, like a road forks or a liver fork.
Exactly. Bifurcate definitely has a more technical, maybe even scientific feel to it.
Okay, so in what kind of situations would we typically hear or read the word bifurcate then, if not, chatting about weekend plans?
So this is where it gets interesting. Dictionary.com highlights its prevalence in those technical and scientific contexts, particularly fields like biology, medicine, and engineering.
Ah, okay.
It's used to describe structures that literally split into two.
Can you give us some concrete examples, like paint a picture for us?
Sure. Think about the natural world.
Yeah.
Dictionary.com mentions Y-shaped flowers, where the stem splits into two distinct floral parts.
Okay, I can picture that.
Or the forked tongues of snakes.
Really?
Again, a clear division into two. Even within our own bodies, we have bifurcations. Like the arteries of the heart branching off to supply blood to different areas. That's a bifurcation.
Wow, okay, so it's used to describe a very literal physical splitting in those fields, very precise. Are there examples beyond living things?
Oh, absolutely. There was a Twitter post included in the dictionary.com entry, actually, that offered a great geographical example.
Oh, yeah.
It said, Lower Manhattan bifurcates Upper Bay into East River and Hudson River.
Ah, I see. One thing splitting into two distinct waterways.
Exactly. It clearly shows one body of water dividing into two distinct paths. A really clear illustration.
Okay, so it seems bifurcate isn't limited to just physical object splitting, right? It can be more abstract.
That's right. Figuratively, bifurcate can be used to describe entities like, say, organizations or governments that divide into separate parts or even factions. Dictionary.com notes that.
So like a company splitting into two divisions.
Precisely. Imagine a large company undergoing a restructuring, maybe splitting its operations into two distinct, independent divisions. You could accurately, if formally, say the company bifurcated.
That makes sense. It's definitely a more formal way of describing a significant split. The example about golf equipment regulations was interesting, too.
Yes. The whole discussion around having different rules for professional and amateur golfers' equipment, that's another instance of bifurcation being proposed.
Right, a split into two distinct sets of regulations within the same sport.
Exactly. And that tweet reference, I think it was from 1828 UK, talking about the risk of a digital Cold War.
Oh, yeah, bifurcating the internet into two blocks.
That's a pretty significant and honestly concerning use of the word. It really underscores how a complex, interconnected system like the internet could potentially split into two separate, maybe controlled entities.
It shows the weight the term can carry when describing these major divisions, for sure. Okay, so we've got a solid understanding now of what bifurcate means, the literal splitting, the figurative splitting where it tends to be used. Now, how does this idea, the splitting into two, connect with the choices we make every day, the coffee shop line dilemma?
Right. This is where the concept becomes really relevant to, well, everyone. Think about any decision you face, big or small. Each one of those moments where you have to choose a path, that's a bifurcation.
Okay.
You're standing at a point where your future can go in one of at least two different directions based on your choice.
So deciding whether to have coffee or tea in the morning is like a tiny mini bifurcation.
Yep.
And deciding whether to accept a new job offer in a different city, that's a much larger, more impactful one.
Precisely. Each decision, regardless of its scale, represents a point of divergence, a branching. And understanding that fundamental branching nature of our choices is, I think, key to navigating them more thoughtfully.
Okay, so connecting this to decision-making research.
Yeah.
You mentioned behavioral economics earlier. How does that field look at these bifurcation points?
That's a great question. Behavioral economics really dives into the why behind our choices at those forks in the road. That IGFMR paper we looked at, it talks about how decision-making is fundamentally how we solve problems and reach goals.
Right, for individuals and businesses.
Exactly. And it highlights that behavioral economics itself is a field getting a lot more attention, alongside things like climate projections, because it helps explain things traditional economics maybe didn't.
What kind of things?
Well, it explores the interplay of emotions, social influences, cognitive biases, all the stuff that makes us human, basically.
Yeah.
It challenges that old idea that we always make purely rational choices.
Which we definitely don't. Thinking back to the coffee line, maybe I chose the line subconsciously because the barista smiled.
Could be. Behavioral economics looks at exactly that. It brings in concepts like prospect theory.
Prospect theory, what's that?
It's the idea, basically, that we tend to feel losses more intensely than we feel equivalent gains. So the fear of losing something often outweighs the potential joy of gaining something of equal value.
So that affects how we approach risky decisions, right? At those bifurcation points where one path seems safer but maybe less rewarding.
Exactly. It explains why we might be risk-averse in certain situations. Behavioral economics also sheds light on non-financial incentives, the role of empathy, and heuristics, those mental shortcuts we use.
Mental shortcuts, like rules of thumb.
Yeah, they help us make decisions quickly, but they can also lead to biases at those bifurcation points.
And this understanding, it has real-world applications, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The paper lists quite a few. Marketing, advertising, how to frame choices, choice architecture.
Choice architecture, like how options are presented.
Exactly. Think about how items are laid out in a supermarket or options on a website. Also, healthcare decisions, promoting sustainability, HR practices, education, user experience design. It's really broad.
So understanding these biases and psychological factors helps design systems or present choices in ways that, well, nudge people.
Essentially, yes. Nudge theory is a big part of it. It's about making the desired choice easier or more intuitive without restricting freedom.
Okay, let's go back to the decision process itself. The IJFMR paper outlines steps, right?
It does. Generally, it's identify your options, the branches of the bifurcation, you could say, then evaluate them against certain criteria, risks, benefits, consequences.
Then you form a preference, make the choice, implement it.
And ideally, review the outcome later. But, and this is key, that whole process is vulnerable to those biases and emotions we just talked about.
So even if we try to be rational at that fork in the road, our feelings or mental shortcuts can push us one way or another.
Absolutely. Which leads nicely into another concept, counterfactual thinking.
Counterfactual, meaning thinking about what didn't happen.
Exactly. It's that what-if thinking we started with. The Very Well Mind article we looked at talks about this dwelling on what could have been if we'd taken the other path at the bifurcation.
The road not taken.
Precisely. And there are two main types. There's upward counterfactual thinking, imagining how the past could have been better.
Like, if only I'd studied harder, I would have passed the exam. Or regretting a breakup, maybe.
Yes, focusing on missed opportunities or better alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's downward counterfactual thinking, imagining how things could have been worse.
Like, Hugh, I nearly missed that car accident if I left a minute earlier.
Right. That can actually make us feel better about the present outcome sometimes. But the upward kind, that's often linked to regret.
And getting stuck thinking, what if? Constantly replaying those past bifurcations isn't healthy, is it?
No, it can lead to rumination, regret, anxiety. It's normal to do it sometimes, but getting trapped is the problem.
Is there anything people can do if they find themselves stuck in that what-if loop?
The article mentions a technique, kind of a mindfulness approach, called STOP.
Okay.
S is for stop, just pause the thought. T is take a breath, center yourself. O is observe, notice what you're thinking and feeling without judgment. And P is proceed mindfully, shift your focus to the present or something else.
Stop, take a breath, observe, proceed. That sounds like a useful tool.
It can be, yeah. It's about breaking that cycle of rumination.
Now, what about before the choice? Do we think about future regret when we're at the bifurcation point? That Dartmouth thesis touched on this, right? Anticipated regret.
Yes, exactly. The abstract mentioned that common feeling we have when we look back and think an alternative choice would have been better. The research investigated whether people actually incorporate the possibility of future regret into their present decisions.
So, like, if I choose path A, will I later regret not choosing path B? Do we actively think like that?
Well, the interesting finding in that particular study was that anticipated regret wasn't clearly or consistently used in the decision-making process they observed.
Really? That's surprising.
It was, somewhat. Their experiments involved choices, kind of like gambling tasks, with potential pain or monetary loss as outcomes. And in that setup, anticipated regret didn't seem to be a strong driver, nor did it strongly elicit physiological responses like stress.
Huh. So maybe we feel regret intensely afterward, but we aren't always good at predicting or using that potential future feeling to guide our current choices, at least not in those kinds of lab settings.
That seems to be what their specific results suggested. Of course, decision-making is complex, and it might play out differently in other contexts for different types of decisions, but it's an interesting finding nonetheless.
It definitely adds another layer to this whole bifurcation idea. It's not just about the split, but how we feel about the paths before, during, and after.
Absolutely. The definition is simple splitting in two, but the implications, especially when tied to our choices in psychology, are really quite deep.
So wrapping this up a bit, we've seen bifurcation as a literal split, rivers, arteries, flowers, and a figurative one, organizations, rules, maybe even the internet.
Right, from the very concrete to the highly conceptual.
And we've connected it fundamentally to decision-making. Every choice point is a kind of bifurcation, a branching of possibilities.
Influenced by everything from rational calculation to emotional biases, and maybe, or maybe not, the anticipation of future regret.
And that leads to that what-if feeling, that counterfactual thinking about the path not taken.
Which can sometimes be helpful, sometimes lead to regret and rumination.
So for everyone listening, as you go about your day, maybe start noticing those moments, the little choices, the big ones. See them as these bifurcations, these forks in your path.
Yeah, just being aware of that structure can be insightful.
And maybe consider this, and this is just something to mull over. Does understanding this concept, this idea that every choice creates these branching realities, actually make navigating future choices any easier?
That's the big question, isn't it? Does naming it and understanding the mechanics change the experience?
Or does the inherent uncertainty of those future paths always leave room for the what-ifs, no matter how much we analyze it?
A provocative thought to end on. This deep dive is really just scratching the surface, isn't it? There's so much more in the psychology and economics of how we choose.
Definitely something to keep exploring. Thanks for walking us through bifurcation today.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating concept.